All right, so tomorrow is Victory Day. We are the only state that celebrates it. I don't like to call it that. I call it Remembrance Day. And here is why. The war in the Pacific, the war against the Japanese, was one of the most savage and costly things that America has ever been involved in, and I don't want it to be forgotten. So as long as I have a voice, I will give it to history that should not be forgotten. And I think a lot of the reason that Victory Day is no longer celebrated is people think it's about dropping bombs on innocent people, and that is not the case. I cannot say why the people celebrated it back in the 40s, but I can say why we're going to give respect to it now. So to set the scene, back in the early 1900s, the Japanese Empire was after world domination, and they were working their way through the Pacific, killing millions and millions of Chinese. The death toll rings up in the 20s of millions of Chinese. And the Japanese were so savage that they were killing innocent Chinese villagers with machetes, because these defenseless villagers weren't even able to defend themselves, so they didn't deem them worth bullets. They were killing them with machetes. That didn't get us involved in the war. We had a Pacific Treaty, and we weren't involved until December 7th, 1941, when they decided to bomb Pearl Harbor. So the Japanese Empire broke the peace treaty, bombed Pearl Harbor, and killed 2,400 Americans in their sleep that morning. Decimated the Pacific Fleet. So then we enter the war. And the Pacific had been occupied by Japan for quite some time, so they were dug into these islands, and we work our way up the Pacific Islands, the Pacific Island Hopping Campaign, to make our way to Japan. And in doing so, lose somewhere around 360,000 Americans. To give that perspective, the war in Vietnam cost about 60,000 Americans. So about 5 times that, 6 times that. The war in the Middle East since 2001 has cost less than 10,000. So about 36 times what has been lost in the Middle East in the last 20 years was lost in the Pacific in less than 4. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible situation. And America had said, all right, we've got this weapon. You done? We finally make our way to Japan. They say no. And our high command drops. They give the call, and we drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Kills around 135,000 people. Still not done. Second call goes to Nagasaki, and around 64,000 people get killed. Finally, they say they're done. War is over. Celebration, victory over Japan Day. VJ Day, as it was called, then turned to Victory Day. You know, maybe people want to say, "Oh, it's a bad holiday. It's a day to celebrate dropping bombs on innocent people," and I agree with that sentiment 100%. But I cannot get on board with this cancel culture. I cannot get on board with forgetting history and acting like it didn't happen, no matter how gruesome, especially if it was as gruesome as things like slavery, as things like World War II, as things like the Pacific, as things like our government deciding to drop bombs on innocent people. It's not a day to celebrate, it's a day to remember. And to wipe away the day is to wipe away the tribute. And I talk to people, young people, high school kids, hey, do you know why we got involved with this? Do you know why this happened? Do you know what your grandparents did? They don't know. So we're going to remember it today. We're not going to celebrate anything about war. There's nothing to celebrate about hundreds of thousands of people dying. By the time the war in the Pacific was over 24 million people had died, most of which Chinese. A couple of million were the Empire of Japan. They fought. And 360,000 were Americans. And 2 bombs got dropped on cities that killed around 180,000 innocent people that were simply the victim of their government's agenda. And those weapons still exist. We dropped fission bombs, uranium being split. That was the first style of atomic bomb And the hydrogen bomb or the fusion bomb is really plutonium or deuterium. Either way, the current bombs that exist are thousands of times more powerful. Only one's ever been detonated, and the physicists messed up with their calculations. It wound up being 10,000 times more powerful than they thought. The 2 bombs we dropped on innocent people are obsolete. The new bombs, the fusion bombs that we have, that China has, that Russia has, that we're afraid Iran is making, we're afraid Korea is making, those fusion bombs, people can't even comprehend how bad they are because only one's ever been detonated. And it was so catastrophic to the planet that the world came together and said, all right, that's it, no more testing bombs. America has over 4,000 of them. So we're not going to forget about what happened in the 40s. We're not going to forget about the 360,000 Americans that died. We're not going to forget about the 24 million Chinese that died. We're not going to forget about the 180,000 innocent Japanese that died. And we're not going to forget about our high command being so desperate we decided to drop bombs on innocent people. No, we're not going to forget. We're going to remember, and we're going to cheers to all that and hope and pray to God that we never repeat that. Remembrance Day.